This is just like another variation on the backseat intruder cases that we've read about. I just thought it was interesting because of what was the point of it. It obviously was a flesh and blood creature because she could feel it, but what was it doing in the backseat? What was it trying to accomplish by being there, other than scaring her, unless scaring her was the entire point of it?
In 1977, late UFO researcher Timothy Green Beckley interviewed a woman by the name of Mary Jorgenson with regards to a bizarre encounter that she had a few years earlier. Her case reads like something straight out of a horror film. At the time, Mary Jorgenson was a 38-year-old payroll accountant for Model Shopping Center in Wanatuck, Indiana. Beckley interviewed her and tape recorded it with her permission. He later transcribed the recording, which appears in the earlier mentioned magazine. Jorgenson recalled that it was Wednesday, September 14, 1977. She had stayed late at the office to work on payroll since it was all due the next day. She finally finished it up at around 9:30 p.m., said goodbye to the night watchman, the only person left in the store, and headed out to her car. My car was parked on a side street about a 10-minute walk from the store. I always get a little scared during that walk to the car because the town is usually pretty deserted at that time of night. The stores are all closed and it's too early for the bars. Also, winter was coming, so it was practically pitch black out. Anyway, I usually just walk at a fast pace and try to get to my car as quickly as possible. Wanatuck is a pretty small town, you know. We don't have much of a police force. I don't think there are more than 5 or 6 officers on at that time of night, and they're located clear on the other side of town from where I work. So you can see why I get a little scared. Jorgenson admits that even though she had walked that route hundreds of times, for some reason on that particular night, she felt something was off. The streets were nearly deserted and it was pitch black out. I finally got to my car. It's a blue Dodge Dart. Everything looked alright to me. I didn't notice anything unusual. Actually, I guess I wasn't looking for anything unusual. I just wanted to get inside the car and get home. So I opened the door, got in, sat down, locked the doors, put the keys in the ignition, and started the engine. Now at that moment, I should have felt safe. I should have been able to relax. But the strange thing is, I didn't feel safe. I couldn't relax. I knew it was just my own worries getting the best of me, but I had the feeling there was someone else in the car with me. Now, I knew it was silly to think such a thing. I always keep my car locked and the windows rolled up, so there's no way anyone can get in. Still, I had this nagging feeling there was someone else in that car. There was someone in the back seat. I knew it was a silly feeling, and I tried to brush it off. But I just couldn't. Jorgenson decided to do the only thing she could think of to put her mind at ease over the matter. She reached into the back seat with her right hand and began to feel around for something that shouldn't be there. I felt all over the back seat. It was empty. Finally, I relaxed and breathed a sigh of relief. That didn't last long. As I repositioned myself to drive, my hand brushed against something, some living thing that was crouching on the floor in the back of the car. This was no inanimate object, it was living flesh. Jorgenson admits that in that moment she completely froze. She was so frightened that she couldn't move. I just sat there and stared straight ahead for what seemed like ages. Finally, I heard a movement. Something was clambering up on the seat and back. Then all was silence again. I really couldn't move or even scream. I was so scared. Part of me wanted to look in the rearview mirror just to see what it was, just to get it over with. Finally, I forced myself to look in the mirror. There on the back seat was the most frightening thing I've seen in all my life. A tiny man-like creature was sitting calmly on the back seat, grinning at me in the mirror. You can't really imagine how terrifying this experience was. The creature was staring straight at me. Jorgenson described its appearance to Beckley. noting that its head was extremely tiny, like, quote, the shrunken heads you see in museums. Further, it had rows and rows of tiny white teeth. Its eyes were a dull, glowing red, and they were looking right into my own. I got the feeling the creature knew how scared I was and was laughing at me. It just sat there completely still, staring at me and grinning. This is when Jorgenson admits she had a breakdown. I completely lost my head, she told Beckley. She immediately opened the car door and took off running, screaming at the top of her lungs. I don't remember what direction, but I really didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there as fast as I could. The next thing I knew, someone was calling the police. I don't know who could have been around at that time of night, but thank God somebody was. When the police finally came, Jorgenson claims they listened patiently to everything she told them, but she got the sense they did not believe a word of what she was saying. I'm sure they thought I was some kind of nut. I kept pleading with them to go to my car, to get that creature out. They didn't even want to do that much, but I guess I made such a ruckus they finally agreed, just to calm me down. By the time the police got to her car, the unwanted occupant had long since departed. Jorgenson noted that nearly an hour had passed before she learned they'd actually checked her vehicle. They found it completely empty. Naturally, almost no one believes me. I just hope somebody who reads this will take me seriously, not for my sake. I don't really care anymore whether or not people think I'm crazy. I just want the public to know what's going on, to know that we may be in danger.
So when I sat down to script this, I hadn't noticed something. I started to look into it, and as I was in the process of making this video, I decided to look up the town of Wanatuck so I could put a picture of, the area. And I couldn't find it. Wanatuck, Indiana. I couldn't find it. And I didn't know what was going on. So I reached out to Albert Rosales, who had the case in his files, and I said, is Wanatuck a real place? Did Beckley make this story up or something? And Albert said, well, I thought it was. So he went and looked, and he couldn't find it either. And then we started speculating on what could have happened. Was this a fictional story, or was this some kind of a screw up with Beckley getting the name wrong? And then we determined that it was probably Wanatuck. And we got the sense that he probably talked to this witness over the phone, and he didn't. She probably said Wanatuck, and he took it to be Wanatuck, and he transcribed the recordings and never actually went back to check a map. And this was a different time back then. You actually had to go dig out maps and stuff. It sounds like he didn't actually check the map to see if the place existed. So he just sort of went with his initial, this is what it sounds like, Wanatuck, Indiana. And he just left it like that in the magazine, when he wrote the article for the magazine. So anyways, yeah, I left the quote in the video as is, but Albert was the one that actually found it. He said, I think he was talking about Wanatuck. So we left it, so we just left it where he's like, I'm going to update the guides, but I just left it in the video because I didn't really want to change the quote. But yeah, I think he got the name wrong of the town. I think it's Wanatuck, Indiana, and it's a really small town. So
MASH was a TV series that aired between 1972 and 1983. It depicted a unit of medical personnel stationed at a Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, or MASH, during the Korean War. One of the biggest stars of the show was Jamie Farr, who played Captain Maxwell Klinger. He appeared in all 11 seasons and even appeared in the spin-off series After MASH, which lasted from 1983 to 1985. He began his career in 1955 and continued to work up until 2019, appearing in over 100 productions, most recently in the series The Cool Kids. Most people don't know this, but in 1965, 7 years before he would land his most popular role, Jamie Farr had a very strange encounter while driving on a lonely road that he referred to as the most frightening experience of his life. Farr detailed his encounter to reporter Phil Brennan, who wrote of it in the November 6, 1984 issue of The Examiner. Jamie claims that in 1965, he and his wife Joy Ann Richards were in Yuma, Arizona, driving on a dark highway out in the desert. They were returning to their home in California after visiting Jamie's mother in Phoenix. They had made the trip several times without issue. There's a very long stretch of desert along that road which was absolutely empty. My mom had packed some things like carrot sticks and celery, and Joy and I were nibbling on those little snacks as we drove along. A single bright light off in the distance suddenly broke the endless expanse of darkness ahead of them. A former veteran of the Korean War who served between 1957 and 1959, Farr was familiar with all manners of planes and helicopters, but this did not seem to be moving. So his first inclination was to assume that the light was probably a beacon on top of a television tower or similar structure on one of the mountaintops, though that assumption quickly vanished when it started to move. We kept an eye on it, and sure enough, it was moving, zigzagging at a terrific rate of speed. And then suddenly, to our amazement, it would stop and just hover there in the distance. As Farr and his wife watched on in amazement, the strange light repeated its stop-and-go maneuvers several times, and then it did something they were not expecting. It seemed to gather speed and began hurtling across the sky directly toward their car. It came all the way down until it was adjacent to our car, moving parallel to us. It was probably about 50 yards away. The astonished couple peered through the darkness, trying to make out the shape of the craft. It had a dome shape we could barely make out, he noted, adding that there were a pair of rotating blue and red lights, which flashed over the desert sand, like the emergency lights of a police car. From this light you could see the UFO create a vacuum, pulling up the sand. Jamie continued driving as the object stayed alongside them. He slammed the gas in an attempt to race ahead of it, though the object merely increased its speed, skimming along the desert floor, easily keeping pace with them. When he sped up, it sped up. When he eased off, it eased off. As they raced along, Jamie realized that his wife did not share his overwhelming fright. Joy wanted me to try to make contact with it, but no way. I wanted no part of it. I just hammered the Renault as fast as I could, but the UFO stayed with us for a while. Just when he thought things couldn't get any more terrifying, a new threat appeared that made his blood run cold. I looked up at the sky and saw a single-engine airplane coming straight at me. In a panic, he swerved the car off the road in a frantic attempt to avoid a head-on collision with this speeding plane. As his car careened wildly across the sand, he suddenly realized that the plane was a phantom. It just disappeared into thin air. He speculated to Brennan that in the years since the encounter, he came to believe that the plane he saw was some type of projection. He sensed that someone aboard the craft had projected the image of an attacking aircraft against the movie screen-like background of the dark sky. At that point, the UFO soared upwards and raced off towards the distant mountaintops, where it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. My feeling was one of pure fright, but my wife's was one of curiosity, because she'd been reading about UFOs since high school. She was all ready to make contact, but not me. I was a devout coward. After all, I still had my career ahead of me, with all those reruns and residual payments to look forward to. Farr told Brennan that prior to his encounter with the strange craft, he had not believed in UFOs. I do now, he said. I can't believe that we're the only intelligent beings in the universe. There have to be others out there. Eventually we'll all be in touch. Regarding the UFO, Jamie was in no rush to repeat the experience. I wouldn't want to ever see another one. One scare like that in a lifetime is enough.
One of the main things that I liked about this case, beyond the fact that it was Jamie Farr, is that he talked about how during this encounter that he he said that this plane seemed to appear out of nowhere and came directly at his car. And he thought, in hindsight, that they may have projected this image. And I haven't really heard that a lot in cases. And it makes you wonder, like, what was the purpose of that? Was it to distract him? I don't know. What was the purpose of having a plane appear? And on that note, I have read a lot of cases where I've even made a video in the past about weird planes, and there does seem to be this thing that pops up in a lot of UFO encounter cases where suddenly this weird plane will appear, seemingly out of nowhere. It kind of looks like a plane, but it kind of doesn't.